Hello there everyone! Welcome to the first episode of Type Moon Character Showcase. Now, if you couldn't tell, this is a new video series created by yours truly. In this series, I will present to you a character from Type Moon, and after that, I'll introduce you into their character or backstory, then go over their abilities or quirks as a character. And finally, I'll give you my own personal opinions on them and final thoughts. There will be separate time codes in the description for each section, so if you want to avoid major spoilers, you could use those to skip any lore. But these videos will inevitably include their fair share of spoilers, especially for the character that I'm talking about. I'll try to warn you about any major ones, but still, keep that in mind. Now, these characters can range from any level of obscurity. They can be one as famous as Artoria Pendragon from Fate's Day Night to... well, let's leave the obscure ones as a surprise for those who don't know yet. Anyway, with those basics out of the way, let me introduce you to the first character that I'll be sharing with you all. Everyone meet Satsuki Yumizuka, also known as Satchin. Little Satsuki is a somewhat popular character for those who have actually read Tsukihime, but is otherwise kind of obscure and little people actually know who she is. For those who haven't read Tsukihime but have watched Carnival Phantasm, you might recognize her as the character whose joke is that she's never included in anything. And that's because she was originally meant to be a heroine for the game, but was sadly scrapped in production, leaving her as only a side character #isn'titsad This might change in the remake, however, as she was literally the first quote-unquote heroine to appear in the remake trailer. But since the remake isn't out yet at this video's creation, sadly, we can't talk about that yet. However, despite her meme status, don't underestimate her, cause, well, here's a little preview. She could even have a chance at beating the servant Gilgamesh. I bet some of you might not believe this, but I'll tell you why that might be the case once we get to the abilities. First, her character and backstory. Satsuki Yumizuka was a classmate of Shiki Tono, the main protagonist of Tsukihime. As a young girl, Satsuki was trapped along with a bunch of other girls in the PE storeroom as the door malfunctioned and locked them in. It was really cold winter, and they were only in their PE uniforms, so they were freezing cold, banging and yelling at the door, hoping for someone to hear them, but seemed nobody was there to help them, and that they were going to be left in the freezing storeroom, possibly for the entire night. Yeah, they were in some real deep shit. However, our boy Shiki was luckily able to notice them, and he used his mystic Eyes of Death perception to kill the lock. You might recognize this ability from another Shiki in Type Moon, but we'll talk about them in later videos. Back to Satsuki. The girls were able to escape thanks to Shiki's help. Satsuki clearly remembered Shiki telling her to go home and eat some warm ozoni. Ever since then, she had been thankful to Shiki for saving her, eventually developing feelings for him. She told this story to Shiki eventually, telling him that she believes that he would be the one to save her whenever she needed help, admitting to him about his position as her hero. Later that night though, an unlucky Satsuki would be bitten by Shiki, not the same Shiki as our protagonist, but Shiki with full caps, a dead apostle vampire. Normally that would turn a human into something we'd call a dead. Dead serve as minions to their parent dead apostle. They're mostly mindless puppets, and will suck as well as eat the flesh of people to survive, giving half of their energy to their parent. However, if their soul survives the biting, they will instead become something called a ghoul, which are basically the same thing, but they devour flesh and blood for their own survival. After many years, they can restore their brain and body, and evolve into a proper dead apostle vampire. Satsuki, however, was an extremely rare case where she had an insane latent potential as a dead apostle, and actually skipped the ghoul phase, immediately becoming a dead apostle vampire right after she was bit. She was still under the control of Shiki, since Shiki had to be killed in order for her to become her own proper dead apostle, but she was regardless a vampire. Even bigger spoiler warning here. Skip to this timecode if you don't want to know her fate, and get to the rest of the video. Depending on your route, Satsuki's fate is slightly different. In the near side, she's killed off screen, presumably by the heroine of the route. However, in the far side, she becomes a problem that Shiki has to face himself as she is now a vampire. For the twins' roots, Shiki would kill her under his madness as she was an inhuman being. However, for Akiha's root, Shiki consciously fights her, almost letting her win, but eventually managing to strike her. Before she dies, she apologizes to Shiki for what she'd done, and realized that a person like Shiki couldn't end up with her after her tragic fate before dying in his arms. After her passing, Shiki was still haunted by guilt and trauma from her loss for not being able to live up to her words and save her when she needed help. Her death later becomes motivation for Shiki to protect Akiha later in the route. A moment of silence for their heroine that wasn't to be. However, Melty Blood takes place after a hypothetical ending where Satsuki survived, and in it, she forms the Back Alley Alliance with fellow tragic dead apostle Sion Eltnam Atlasia and Sion's girlfriend. It's technically not canon, but I ship it, so let me have this. Reese Beef Street of... How the fuck do you pronounce this name? Anyway, that is the tragic story of Satsuki Yumizuka, a girl that had loved Shiki for saving her, but was ultimately turned into a vampire and left to suffer a grisly fate at his own hands. However, on the bright side of things, Satsuki's abilities as a vampire are no joke. She's really powerful and has some very unique abilities that can counter a lot of specific things. As I brought up before, Satsuki was a rare exception among rare exceptions, and had insane aptitude to being a dead apostle vampire. So much so that moments after her creation, she was comparable to a dead apostle ancestor in terms of latent power. And who knows how broken she would get if she were to hone that ability. However, that itself is just a who knows. Because the fact is, in all known scenarios, Satsuki is only comparable to a normal dead apostle ancestor as she hasn't yet pursued the life as one. Instead still being somewhat of a high schooler with vampire powers, hanging out and protecting people from the shadows alongside with the other Back Alley Alliance members. Because of that, a lot of her full capabilities actually still remain in mystery and unknowns. However, as of now, her vampire skills are still far from a joke. Being comparable to a dead apostle ancestor as she is insane enough already. Dead apostle ancestors are already confirmed by Nasu himself to be comparable to most servants in terms of power and mystery, if not slightly less. Like most other proper vampires, she has mystic eyes of enchantment, which are a type of mystic eye that allow for easy hypnosis to normal humans, as well as turning them extremely horny when let loose. Let's hope Satsuki never does that, because she deserves protection, not rape. Then again, she'd probably destroy anyone that tries. Now if you recall earlier in the vid, I made the hot take that she could possibly beat the servant Gilgamesh in combat. And while a dead apostle ancestor could fight servants, Gil isn't necessarily one of those servants, not without some exceptional circumstance. However, Satsuki is different, as she has a special ability unique to her that's considered a rare anomaly even for vampires, further cementing Satsuki as a ball of insane innate vampire potential. Now, not everyone actually knows about this, even a fraction of those that have read Tsukihime or played Melty Blood, because it's never actually shown or mentioned outside of character bios and leaked plans. However, the fact that she has this ability is canon, so it's more than valid to add, and that ability is her very own reality marble. Satsuki has a reality marble known as Depletion Garden, and while we don't know its appearance, I'd assume it's less of a physical reality marble like Unlimited Blade Works, but something that affects a certain existing area with its own rules. What it does is that it rapidly depletes all forms of magical energy whatsoever at a high speed. Mana, Odd, Prana, whatever, is all fair game. It directly targets the world once it's active, so it's not just humans either. Literally all forms of existing magical energy is depleted in the reality marble at an extremely fast rate. Depletion Garden is said to be the natural enemy of all magi, as any form of magecraft is completely unusable inside it. There is no mana or odd to make any spells, so any magi inside is basically as fucked as any other human. This also means that any being comprised with magical energy will not only be powerless, but will actually disintegrate inside of it. For instance, elementals and nature spirits like true daemons and golems are immediately fucked over. Servants as well are beings of magical energy, as they are literally created from the mana from either the Grail or the summoning system of Chaldea. And while you could argue they could last a bit longer than a golem, they'd still more than likely just disintegrate within the garden, just like any other form of magecraft. This includes Gilgamesh. Now, you might argue that Gilgamesh could use Ea or Gate of Babylon to spam at Satsuki immediately before she could activate it, and the victory would be his. And you'd be completely right. I completely agree with you. However, this is Gilgamesh, the cockiest man on earth, and he isn't gonna give a shit about some random high schooler girl. While on the other end, Satsuki would not hesitate to go all out immediately if she needs to. You could also argue that Gilgamesh could use Clairvoyance to predict that Satsuki was a risk and use Gate of Babylon to spam her. And yes, that could happen too. But also remember that in Strange Fake, Gil has no clue what a dead apostle is, let alone a dead apostle ancestor, as well as their power levels. He pretty much regarded them as similar trash to humans, so he probably wouldn't care or bring note to Satsuki's existence. That same arrogance is what got him killed in 2 Roots of Fate Stay Night. I'm not saying that Satsuki would be an instant win. If Gil basically interrupts her before she activates the garden, it's his win. But that being said, she still has a decent chance. Basically, once she activates Depletion Garden, it's game over. But I'm absolutely sure that someone's going to argue that in the comments section anyways. However, regardless if she could beat Gil or not, Depletion Garden is a very, very strong ability that targets a wide fraction of power in the Nasuverse. It is not overpowered, however. As while it depletes magical energy, if one can fight without the need of magical energy, this isn't going to be a big problem. Normal humans that aren't mages, for example, and other beings like vampires or phantasmal species that don't use magical energy wouldn't be affected. Aristoteles will also not care, since they don't follow the same rules or concepts of the Earth. So it's far from an instant win button to every enemy. Even so, this is a powerful ability and is well deserving of being called Satsuki's trump card, and will have to be taken into consideration for any battle with her. For my personal and overall thoughts on Satsuki, I'm just going to say it, I adore her. I love her, and I want to give the poor girl a hug. I really felt sympathy for her character when reading Tsukihime, especially in Akiha's route, as her entire scene with Shiki just made me feel sad for the poor girl who was just unlucky in the worst places. Falling to a point where she couldn't return and driven to do difficult acts just to be with the one she loved. And even then, she happily accepted her end in most timelines for knowing about how much of a monster that she had become. I felt more for her in Akiha's route than with any moment with Akiha herself, which says both about how much I care for Sachin, as well as my overall indifference on Akiha. She struck a chord, and the fact that her running joke is that she's always left out and not recognized really makes me sad, even if it is kind of amusing. #deleted_root. However, she is lucky in the fact that as a vampire, she had insane potential and obtained amazing power, enough to land on the mid to high spectrum of the Nasuverse power meter. And considering how mad the strongest guys are, that's not bad for someone who barely knows how their own powers work. I chose to make a video for Sachin as the first episode instead of, one of the main heroines of the Nasuverse, simply because I wanted to start the series off by sharing my knowledge of this underappreciated supporting character, whose insane abilities aren't completely known by everyone, even by those who know her. Nasu has a tendency to write characters that can be very strong in certain scenarios or battles depending on the situation, and Satsuki is an example of that in both the winning and losing spectrums, with unique abilities that allow her to win most battles, yet also dying really early in most existing timelines. Satsuki is a likable character in my opinion, and I personally really cared for her, especially in the Akiha route. I'm looking forward to the remake where she'll likely get her own route, and we can finally see her full capabilities in action. Until then, I'll join her in the wait, until she can finally be appreciated as the 6th heroine of Tsukihime. So that was it for the first episode of Type Moon Character Showcase. Please tell me your thoughts on this first episode. I won't ask for direct recommendations for characters, and I won't be doing these in any specific order. I realize that the main heroines or protagonists are popular, but I'll tell you right now that I'm just going to go willy-nilly and see where I go because I do not give a shit. So, regardless, I hope you stick with me and this series. But until then, farewell. I'll see you in the next character showcase.